Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to learn more about how to use formative assessment to support early literacy learning. My name is Angelica Cruz, and I have the great pleasure of serving as the Director of Literacy at the Oregon Department of Education. I'm also joined today by colleagues from West Ed, as well as some amazing educators to help present this information to you today. We're very grateful that all of you decided to use your Tuesday afternoon to join us to speak more about formative assessment. We would love to see who all is joining us today. If you could please add into the chat your name and your role. Feel free to add your district or where you work, and share a time that you remember learning something new and receiving feedback on your progress. How did that impact your learning? We'll open the chat up here just for a few moments for folks to add in name and role, district if you'd like to share that, and a time you remember learning something new and receiving feedback on your progress. Thinking specifically about how that impacted your learning. Give everyone just a minute of wait time here. Great, thank you, Jen. Canby School District, I love that. Say hello to Jennifer Patterson for us. She was our former assistant superintendent and now over there leading Canby. Love your comment. Feedback is helpful so you know how to adjust and how to improve. Excellent. Well, I'll let folks add their comments into the chat and we'll go ahead and move forward for sake of time. But just really wanted to ground everybody in reflecting on a moment that you learned something new and thinking about our students and how they reflect on their own progress. So this webinar will provide an opportunity to learn about the role of formative assessment in a comprehensive early literacy program. So we have four key goals today, focused all on deepening your knowledge of formative assessment as a process that's integrated into teaching and learning, as a means to gauge your students' literacy learning, as a key source of information to tailor instruction, and as a strategy for learners to develop ownership over their learning. Here's our agenda for the afternoon. We just completed a quick welcome and a community building activity. As I see more folks are adding to the chat, thank you. Next, we'll launch into an overview of how the formative assessment process supports all learners and the role of students using self-assessment and peer feedback to advance their learning. Then we'll spend the majority of our time seeing what formative assessment looks like in action through some examples from our educators here today, helping to co-present this webinar. And finally, we'll end with a brief reflection and a closing activity. Before we launch into our formative assessment content, we want to really ground everyone and our learning today in Oregon's early literacy framework. As you may know, Oregon's early literacy framework was published in May of 2023. And the purpose of the statewide literacy framework is to help build momentum and capacity for making literacy instruction stronger in Oregon so that all of our students leave elementary school reading and writing with grade level fluency, with confidence, and with competence in at least one language. It also serves to build coherence, common ground, and clarity across the state for the vision of literacy instruction so that we can really come together and work together to improve literacy outcomes for every Oregon student. Finally, it aligns with the governor's vision for improving literacy outcomes across our state with an intentional emphasis on how the framework elevates the literacy and language assets that diverse learners bring. This framework is really intended to be actionable for district and building leaders, useful for teachers. And we really hope that this grounding sets a foundation for our learning today. There are 7 guiding principles upon which the framework builds on our next slide here. The first is that early literacy begins at birth. Children are full of literary promise. Families and communities play a vital role. Multilingualism benefits everyone. Foundational skills matter. Teacher knowledge and practice are critical, and every student can be taught to read and write. The framework is then divided into 8 sections on our next slide, thank you, to guide teachers and leaders in creating the conditions for learning that are necessary for high quality literacy instruction, as well as a deep dive into the convergence of research on literacy in the brain, the importance of explicit systematic instruction of foundational skills, and how to teach writing, reading comprehension, vocabulary, and background knowledge. Section 7, which is where we'll be focusing today, is all about the importance of core instruction and how to use the formative assessment process to move student learning forward. The last and final section of the framework is focused on reaching all learners, specifically our multilingual learners and our students with disabilities. And all 8 of these sections work together to lift literacy in our classrooms. And with that, I will pass it over to our West Ed colleagues to begin our deep dive into the formative assessment process.
Hi, everybody. My name is Barbara Jones, and I am a research manager at West Ed. And I've been working, learning about formative assessment, supporting states and districts to use formative assessment for the last 20 years, I would say. And my current interest around it is thinking about how it can best support diverse learners and be culturally responsive and sustaining. Yessie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Yesenia Ayala, and I'm a program associate 2 under the Assessment for Learning team here at West Ed. And I actually sit on a sub-content team called the Formative Insights team. And similar to Barbara, my work focuses on formative assessment implementation from State House to classroom practice. And I'm very interested in thinking about the student role in learning. So we are really excited to have you with us today.
Next slide. All right, so we wanted to start off with just thinking about why are we doing this work? Why is it important? Why is it helpful in the classroom? And it's just to say that the research over the last couple decades has shown that formative assessment is one of the most powerful levers to advance student learning. So for example, here we show a couple different meta-analyses done by Hattie and Black and William that show strong effect sizes for parts of the process, such as learning goals and feedback. And Black and William found that their effect size meant that formative assessment really doubled the average growth students would be expected to make on standardized tests in a school year. We know it's practiced in multiple ways, so we're going to be talking about a way that the research shows has this type of effect. Next slide, please. All right, so here's a quote by scholar Riley Ayers, who talks about why this is also really helpful for young learners, because we know that their profiles are a little bit different than older students. So formative assessment is the most appropriate assessment approach for young children, she says, because their development is highly complex, dynamic, and often erratic and uneven, which makes it difficult to capture learning through one-time assessments that provide only a snapshot of a child in a particular moment. Formative assessment can also shed light on those areas of a child's development, such as social and emotional skills and approaches to learning, that other types of assessment often overlook. So with formative assessment, a teacher can take their time and really understand the context in which what the evidence is giving them to be able to make better sense of it. With a test that gives you a score or points, it doesn't tell you why it's that way. It also doesn't capture the emergent learning that might be happening for students. Next slide.
So while there are many ideas out there about what formative assessment is, we want to anchor on the way that we here at ODE are thinking about it. So formative assessment is a process, right, used by both teachers and students. And this process informs the use of evidence of learning to make decisions and also think about the implications for planning. It also provides clarity on what students are expected to learn and helps inform next steps in the teaching and learning space. So many times we might hear variation of definitions of formative assessment, and we want to clarify the formative assessment is not a standalone test like Barbara mentioned, or a form of evaluation. So it's not a single event, right, that results in a point or a grade. And it is something that is not only interpreted by teachers and leaders. So again, really thinking about the student and the role they also play. And it's not separate from the learning process, right? Sometimes we might think that it's something that is separate, but it's embedded within the learning process. And formative assessment is not a way that we use to compare students' performance. Next slide, please. So here you see a set of formative assessment practices, and these practices include the clarification of learning goals and success criteria as we think about the broader progression of learning. It includes eliciting and analyzing evidence of student thinking and learning, engaging in self-assessment and peer feedback processes, also providing actionable feedback, and using evidence and feedback to move learning forward by adjusting what's next in learning. So both teachers and students, so again, both teachers and students are part of this process, integrate these practices in a collaborative and respectful classroom environment. So we're curious to hear from you. So does anything surprise you from this description of formative assessment? Were these ideas already familiar to you? And if you can please type your response in the chat. Take a second. So it's either love seeing that peer feedback can be part of this. Okay, you can continue writing your responses. So we'll go to the next slide, please.
All right, so we want to make sure that everyone is on the same page in the terms that we're using. So I'm just going to briefly go over some of the key concepts and terms that we're using today. So a learning goal in the context of formative assessment communicates what students are expected to learn in a lesson, and a lesson can be defined as 1 to 5 class periods. Success criteria define what it means to meet the learning goal, such as the qualities of work or the skills that students are demonstrating. And evidence is anything a student says, does, makes, or write during the learning, anything that is observable, audible. And feedback is pretty self-explanatory, but we're talking about it as the type of hints, clues, or suggestions that teachers or peers can give students to help move that learning forward. Next slide. All right, so here is an image which you'll see a couple times today and shows what this looks like in practice. So it starts with developing a vision for the learning. What are goals for my students as a teacher or for myself as a student? What is it going to look like? How am I going to know if my students have gotten there or if I've gotten there as a student? And this helps answer the question, where am I going? And then next, it's looking for evidence of where students are in their learning during the learning. So that's more about that analysis of what's happening in real time during learning, eliciting evidence, interpreting evidence, and then finally taking action, responding to that evidence, giving that feedback, making instructional adjustments or adjustments to learning tactics, and then starting over. So this represents a foundation to teaching and learning decision-making every day in the classroom. And it's something that both students and teachers participate in. Next slide. And this is a model that may be a shift for many teachers and students. It's about kind of students playing a more active role and being responsive in the moment to the evidence that's coming up. And it's based on a set of values that can help teachers make that shift. So it's about developing personal and collective responsibility for the learning, making decisions grounded in evidence, creating opportunities for all to have a voice in the learning process. And this can include families and caregivers, learning in partnership. So it's about that improvement cycle basically in the classroom for both teachers and students, tailoring instruction to student needs, and then using this to scaffold grade level content for student accessibility. And then all of this occurring within a culture of trust. Next slide, please. All right. So just as formative assessment is a key practice for supporting young learners, it is also a key practice for supporting diverse learners. And these are just a few examples of ways that formative assessment can do this. So for example, learning goals and success criteria can include language skills for multilingual learners. So to call out that disciplinary language that they need to be able to access grade level content. And then evidence of learning can inform how to scaffold that grade level content for all students, but particularly for exceptional students who also need access to those grade level skills and content. And then last, students can choose from a variety of modalities to demonstrate their learning, because at times, if there's just one way to do that, it's really hard to interpret results. Maybe a student just had struggle demonstrating their learning in that particular way. But if they can choose, then it's really easier to more accurately assess where students are in their knowledge and skills. Next slide. So a common refrain that we say in formative assessment and in other areas as well is that all learning starts with what students already know and can do and builds off of that, which we're terming an asset orientation. And within a formative assessment framework, there are certain ways that teachers can embed this in their practice. So they can also build on students' existing literacy knowledge when creating the learning goals and success criteria. So taking the time to assess where that is before developing those. They can integrate students' funds of knowledge into the design of literacy learning tasks. So these are students' experiences, backgrounds, cultures, interests, often gained outside of the classroom, that can make learning more relevant to them and build off of their existing schema. And then providing feedback that engages students' sense-making about new learning. So not necessarily just is it right or wrong, or looking for a clean match with expectations, but really getting in there to honor students' thinking and how they're making sense of it, to build from there as a positive part of the learning process. All right, next slide. So here's one example of a type of formative assessment practice that has an asset orientation. And these are called learning stories, and they were developed first in New Zealand. And these are narratives that teachers write, so little mini stories that they write about a particular student's learning experience. So maybe a student is involved in problem solving in math, or doing collaborative writing, or something that is more play-based or artistic, whatever it is, but the teacher notices, wow, they're really pushing on their learning in some way, maybe, or maybe they're making advances socially or in terms of their communication, or they're exploring a creative practice. And they write a story about it based on documentation that they create, such as photographs that they take, quotes they've gathered from listening, reflections that they have about what's going on with that student. And they write that story that's always positive. Right? So it's very motivating to young learners, and it's written for students and their families. So it's not a type of accountability measure for others, but it's written for students. So it's read aloud to them, students read them themselves, share them with their families, and then they also reflect back. They put their reflections in the stories as well, so it can become part of a portfolio of evidence over the course of a year about students' learning. And scholar Isuaro Escamilla puts it this way. She says, learning stories offer an opportunity to reimagine children as curious, knowledgeable, playful learners, and teachers as critical thinkers, creative writers, and advocates of play. So it also elevates the teacher role in this process. All right, next slide. All right, so next we're going to be talking about the student role and what that looks like, with a particular focus on self-assessment and peer feedback. Next slide.
Yeah, so when we think about the student role, we think about this shift that happens for students when they begin to use evidence in a variety of ways. So students are engaged in exploring academic content through collaborative learning and through individual analysis of evidence. So self-assessment allows students to interpret evidence of learning and allows them to then use that evidence to make decisions about what's next steps for them in their learning and students anchor in learning goals and success criteria as they do this. And the research on this is very clear around how students are able to use evidence individually and collectively to guide learning in ways that helps build their collective efficacy. And the research shows that supporting students to use evidence of learning strengthens their identity as learners. It motivates them to learn and is key to sometimes resolving some behavioral experiences, issues we might experience in our classroom. But that doesn't happen unless we explicitly model and teach students, but what we mean by the evidence use. So how, as teachers, do we create new routines, tasks, and modeling to show students where they are in their learning and also support them to ensure that they also feel safe to engage with others around them, in particular when they might not know what they don't know yet. Next slide.
So here's an example of a self-assessment continuum that students can use. Because for students to self-assess, they need protocols, they need resources to help guide the way. And we've talked about using the success criteria, which is an excellent resource. And this basically takes success criteria and shows the steps to get there as well. So it shows a typical learning progression. And this continuum is for collaborative discussions. So at the merging level, it's, when I talk to my friends in class, I mostly use my hands and face to let others know how I feel. I don't necessarily talk unless someone talks to me, or I do most of the talking. So this kind of represents an early stage in participating in discussions. Then moving on to the next level where students start to be able to ask more questions of their peers when they're confused. They might be able to share ideas that are on the same topic instead of just disparate. They're still struggling with being able to express themselves when they disagree or have balanced conversation. And then at the more advanced level, they're able to really connect their ideas with other people. So build shared knowledge. They're able to understand how to have a balanced conversation so they can lean in or lean out to support their peers and add to their understanding. So these kind of tools are really helpful for students to be able to take stock in their learning and also identify next steps and where they want to go. Next slide.
Yeah, so I'm going to read a quote by the Education Hubs around self-assessment. So self-assessment is a powerful learning strategy. Students who can assess their own learning are more effective learners. They are more motivated and engaged, have a greater belief that they can succeed, and are able to adapt their approach if learning is not working. Assessment-capable students show higher achievement. So in other words, here we see that students have a greater sense of agency when they engage in self-assessment opportunities. Next slide, please. So another means of student involvement in formative assessment is through peer feedback. So peer feedback is the practice of students analyzing evidence of learning in relationship to the success criteria. So the success criteria, like Barbara mentioned, is what students say, do, or make, or write that provides evidence of that learning. So students then support their peers by providing them with suggestions, wonderings, or hints to support their peers as their peers take next steps in their learning. This peer feedback process enhances student learning experiences and allows them to support one another in each other's learning. Next slide, please. So here we have a quote around peer feedback. So peer feedback can foster individual responsibility and motivate students to provide high quality work. It has also been shown that peer assessment can increase accountability to one another, and aid in the development of problem-solving skills. So peer feedback also offers students the opportunity to reflect on their own work and also compare that work, right? And learning with that of others, which really enhances those metacognitive skills that students are developing. Next slide, please. And now many times when we think about the student role, teachers are like, but what is my role, right? And teachers play an important role in designing these structured occasions and also creating the conditions for students to engage in self-assessment and peer feedback processes. So teachers provide those opportunities for students to practice and reflect by modeling and using protocols. Teachers must also provide opportunities for students to practice and using the self-assessment and peer feedback processes by also engaging students in those protocols. So not just modeling, but also allowing students to do it with one another. And collectively, these protocols support students to engage and practice that ultimately supports students' skills as their an increase in student agency. Next slide, please. And when we think about the indicators of success, you see 4 here. So when we think about the shifts in the student role and then how students are actively engaging in their learning, some indicators include an increased sense of agency, rich discussions with discourse, students feel a sense of belonging, and we see that students become successful in literacy achievements. Next slide, please. So now we are going to pass it over to one of our educators, Anissa Jimenez.
Hi, my name is Anissa Jimenez, like Yessie said, and I am a 2nd grade teacher. I teach for the Sunnyside Unified School District in Tucson, Arizona. So I'm going to be talking to us today about how I use the feedback loop specifically in my practice and how I use formative assessment partnered with that feedback loop. And we're going to watch some videos about what that looks like in the classroom. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to bring us back really quickly to the feedback loop because this is a tool that I use when I'm planning, especially small group literacy lessons and really all lessons. I ensure that I'm anchoring myself here when planning my instructional moves in terms of eliciting, interpreting, and responding to evidence like we see here in the loop. So in the next few slides, we're going to see particular parts of the feedback loop in action. We're going to watch some videos, and then I'm going to share some of my thinking that happened as these videos were taking place. Okay, so thinking about eliciting and interpreting evidence of learning. In this clip here, we're going to watch. It's important to note that I'm going into this small group already having gathered some assessment data on my students, since this is a literacy small group, a reading small group, and that groups are made by similar levels of abilities. So I have planned this group based on that information, and they are engaging a task that I planned ahead of time that is at their level. And so as they engage here, I'm continuously going through the feedback loop. So we're going to watch for times that I elicited and interpreted evidence, and then thinking too about how this is modeling the use of evidence for students. Something to note during the video, as we start the video, you may want to be by your volume control just in case you need to adjust once the video starts.
All right, so we're going to listen to some words first. We're going to practice stretching them and then finding how many sounds it has. Are you ready? So the first word I want us to stretch out is stem. Okay, ready? What was the word?
Stem.
Stem. Stretch it out for me.
Stem.
So I heard some different things. Some friends left out the blend and some friends left out the vowel. So let's try it again. Listen to it carefully when I say it. Listen first. Stem. Ready?
So we're reading
Stem.
chapters 8, 9, and 10.
And good job, Angel. Ready, Lucius? I'm going to have you stretch it one more time. Stem. Okay, let's tap it now. You can count it if you prefer that, or you can tap it. It's up to you. Ready? Stem. Okay. How sounds does it have? It has 4 sounds. That's right.
The first one is S.
Oh, Lucius can tell me that the first sound is S. So we'll focus on that when we get to spelling it. Let's stretch another one. The next one is bench.
Bench.
Pay attention to what's happening to your mouth. Bench. Do you see how your tongue goes behind your teeth in part of the word? Bench. Bench. Okay, stretch it out for me. Bench. Ooh, let me hear it again. I'm not hearing that blend at the end. Bench. Oh, I heard it that time. Okay, next one. Lend. Good job, Lucius. I heard that blend. I forgot to count the last one. Can we count lend? Ready?
Yeah.
Is it three? That would be
last one
ed.
A middle one is
The middle one, listen again. Lend. You can do it this way. And.
the first one.
Do you guys hear what's happening at the end? Listen to when you say it. Lend. What do you hear at the end? I hear a D, but what else do you hear with it? Lend.
And
There's an N in there too, creating a blend. That's right. All right, so we're gonna listen to some.
All right, so with this group in particular, I was focusing on those end blends. So a lot of my feedback was specific to that skill because that is what I had noted in previous lessons that was these students were in need of. And so my feedback went from being very general to the whole group, and then it tiered down to being specific to students based on what the evidence that I was eliciting and interpreting, and those were my responsive actions. So we're going to go to the next video where we're going to focus more on my responsive actions. So as this lesson progressed, students began to engage in more independent tasks. So they started to go into the spelling of the words. And so my feedback to them, my teacher's feedback, again, became more specific to what each individual student needed. So let's watch here.
There is this digraph, but I hear it. Where do you hear it? Bench. I hear that digraph, but not quite yet. You just practice that like elephant. Okay. I agree with this vowel, and I know what you meant to put here, but this one is a D. Did you mean to put D or B? We need the curve on the other side. Okay, tap it for me again. You can even stretch it out again, Dylan. Ready? Bench. And remember, digraphs only make one sound. So it should be long line, frog jump to the middle, small curve this way. Very nice, Lucius. Bench. Okay, look at this digraph here. What does that digraph say? Look at the symbol. So this would say bench. We wanted to say bench, like when you sneeze. Which digraph is that? Chick. Like chick, exactly. You did the same thing. So you did the SH digraph, but that digraph says we want the one that says like you're sneezing or like chick. What digraph is that? Ooh, this is an S. This is C. Can you show me CH? And then we're gonna work on this letter. There is
All right, so there we saw some of my responsive actions. Like I said, my feedback became more specific as students started to work independently, so their errors were, specific to them. And I also started the process of getting them to see some of their own mistakes. I was questioning a lot. If you notice, they also had sort of like a small sized alphabet next to them. And so students were referring to that resource as they self-corrected, as they self-assessed, and as they responded to my questions at prompting. Next slide. So here we're going to see some more of that shift. I am still questioning and prompting here, but students are starting to notice more of their arrows. So thinking about, again, that feedback loop and how student and teacher are going through that feedback loop. This is kind of that shift towards students taking themselves around and responding to their own evidence.
We both got blue.
So I agree, but I think maybe what's happening is we're working in the wrong boxes. Count it for me. Blend. Ooh, and do. Do you see your mistake? So it should be E like elephant, Angel. This says stem. How can we make it say stem? Okay, you're almost there. Stem. You got there. All right, my friends, go ahead and erase your soundboards, and then you may go back to your stations. If you're doing air, please do not forget to watch your video first.
Okay, so thinking back to that feedback loop, something that I mentioned at the beginning and I want to go back to here is that we go around the feedback loop many times in a single lesson. And so thinking about every instructional move that I made based on what I saw with students, there were many throughout that lesson. And then thinking about by the end of just that 12-minute group that I had with those 3 students, how they started to progress through developing their role in the learning and then going through the loop themselves. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to see a group of older students. These are 4th grade students. And in this class, this was further along in the school year. I wouldn't say that it was necessarily because they are older students. Younger students are very, very capable of this level of thinking and understanding. These students were just a little bit further along in the school year and were more exposed to some explicit modeling on my part. So they were focused on fluency, and on the previous slide, this was their success criteria. So well, here's them referencing and anchoring themselves to some of the success criteria, as we mentioned, or as was mentioned earlier in the presentation. This is really what students are expecting from one another. So here, reading all or almost all of the words correctly, correcting themselves and rereading when what they read was wrong or didn't make sense, reading at a speed that is appropriate for the piece, reading smoothly, breaking at stanza breaks or punctuation, reading groups of related words and phrases together, noticing and reading punctuation, using appropriate tone and expression, and then using facial expressions or body language to match expression in the voice. And then last but not least, just focusing on appropriate volume and change in volume as needed. All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, so like I said, this is a 4th grade class. They're engaging in peer feedback. So moving from so much of the teacher eliciting, interpreting, and responding to evidence to then students beginning to elicit, interpret, and respond to one another's evidence of learning and their own evidence of learning based on that success criteria that we just went over.
A little bit louder. People punctuation. He goes punctuation. So how did he do with that?
Ramon actually forgot to stop at several periods, but right here in this part, he actually remembered to stop in periods. And for the rest of the story, I think he needs to work on more stopping at correct punctuation. And I think he also needs to work on reading fluently, because when he was reading, he had to stop for some words that he couldn't read and other stuff from the text. So I think he really needs to work on reading fluently.
Okay, so his glow would be that he read most of the punctuation, right? That's what you're telling me? That's what I heard you say? And then his grow would be reading more fluently, reading more smoothly. Good.
All right, so we can see there that they were taking responsibility for their own learning and through engaging in that peer feedback. And when the role shifts to students being able to elicit, interpret, and respond to their own evidence, truly the learning becomes a shared experience. And students develop ownership in the classroom and how the learning is done. And thinking back to earlier in the presentation, this is how in this, specific content, it will lead to literacy achievement. So next, we are going to hear from my teacher coach at my site, Samantha Fernandez, who has been an excellent model for me for quality practice and a huge supporter of my personal practice.
Thank you, Anissa. And so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in these next just very few slides is really how, as coaches or as teacher leaders, we support the teachers in our building to deepen their practice, their formative assessment practice, and their language and literacy instruction. Next slide. So reflecting on the stance of the leaders at a site is critical when we think about creating a culture of learning. So shifting away from leading with an expert stance, where the focus is more on getting it right and evaluative, stepping away from that can really support teachers to try and put new formative assessment processes into practice and to put new literacy practices into their practice. So the way that the leaders communicate to teachers about we're trying something new and you're trying something new matters a lot for how we're creating that culture of we're learning, students are learning, leaders are learning, everyone in the school is a learner. And then when leaders and teachers come together from that standpoint of curiosity, we can support each other to take risks and try new things. And then with that culture of learning, we create those conditions where teachers are supporting and learning from one another as well. So it's important for leaders to recognize and leverage the expertise that teachers have in their buildings. And leadership can and should position teachers to share the things that they're learning with their peers, their colleagues, the things that they're trying in their classrooms that might be very different from things that they're comfortable with or have tried before, which again could be those formative assessment processes or instructional routines for language and literacy development in students. So our role is really shifting the culture at the site to be that culture of learning and risk-taking. Next slide. And then a major part of that in creating that culture is the professional learning that happens for teachers at the site. So shifting kind of away from when we're thinking about engaging teachers in professional learning, shifting away from that getting things done model and moving towards learning and moving practice forward. So when we're thinking about engaging teachers, we think kind of how Ms. Jimenez did with her students, engaging her students in the feedback loop. We do the same when we think of professional learning for our teachers. So in this case, moving away from the sit and get maybe traditional type ways, that model, and centering around how we use the feedback loop to develop and move practice forward. And so facilitators of professional learning, who could be leadership team members, it could be teachers. Ms. Jimenez, for example, has given many professional learnings for the teachers at our site, and a lot of the teachers see her as a leader as well. And so focusing, whoever is facilitating the professional learning, a peer teacher or a leader, focuses teachers on those clear goals and the criteria for professional learning, support teachers to identify where they are. So bringing in opportunities for reflection, for self-assessment, just the way we do with students. We structure tasks for teachers to engage in so that they're able to explore those new ideas and have conversations around the things that they're learning and put those ideas into practice. Professional learning also means we're going to come back and we have opportunities to revisit how did the application go, what's working, what's not working, what are those sticking points for you, and how do we help each other to move past that in our formative assessment practices and maybe in specific literacy and language processes. And then teachers and leaders think about eliciting evidence the same way that teachers think about eliciting evidence for their students. Where are my teachers, where are my peers in their learning? What's going to help them get unstuck from where they are? How do we move forward together? Okay, next slide. So collaborative learning is something we've been trying to move more towards at our site for some time. And so recognizing that even though we're in different places in terms of our understanding and use of formative assessment processes and in our use of literacy and language instructional practices, that we all have strengths, and then we all have areas that we want to grow in, we want to strengthen for ourselves. And so engaging in collaborative learning together by sharing those new ideas we're putting into practice, by looking at student data or evidence together, sharing what's happening, and giving each other feedback really allows us to push on what's happening and ultimately improve the learning outcomes for our students. Something that Ms. Jimenez had spoke to was the importance of feedback, both teacher to student feedback, student to student feedback, and just as equally important, teacher to teacher feedback has to play a role when we're collaboratively learning together. So having fellow teachers be part of that cycle of the feedback loop and part of giving feedback to help strengthen your practice, that's one of those ways that we shift our learning to more mirror kind of what we're wanting for our students. So we're modeling that same way of working. And that collaboration really is key in supporting teachers to develop formative assessment processes while they're developing those instructional practices that strengthen their students in their literacy development. Next slide.
All right, thank you so much. I want to borrow a phrase from Sunnyside that, tell me if I get this wrong. We learn by doing, is that right? Or we learn through
We
doing?
learn the work by doing the work.
Thank you. All right, so we want to propose to you that you try out some of the things that you've heard in this webinar. We know many of you are in the role of supporting teachers versus being in the classroom, but either way, we're hoping that you can find a classroom and try it out or support a colleague in this work. So, start out by maybe explaining what you've learned. What about the formative assessment process stood out to you? What would you like to see happen in the classroom? And then try collecting and using evidence of literacy learning to support students while they're engaged in a lesson. So what does that actually look like? And we know that all of this is like practice, practice, practice. So whether you're doing it yourself or you're supporting teachers to do this work, no one gets it right out of the gate. There isn't, in fact, a right way to do it, but it's always a process of discovery. And last, try to involve students in the process. Maybe it's through self-assessment, getting students to start thinking about where they are in their learning. What kind of tools do they need? We talked about protocols and, some of them were described. Anissa described the glows and the grows. There are things like that that really help kids think about where they are in student-friendly language. So this is something that we hope that you can give a whirl. Come back to us, let us know how it goes. And with that, I'll turn it over to Angelica.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope that you found this webinar helpful and informative for your practice or the practice of the teachers you support. We have summarized the key takeaways from today with you here. We hope you leave today with an understanding of how formative assessment is a process that informs ongoing decisions about teaching and learning, that engaging both teachers and students in formative assessment enhances student agency, and that formative assessment is a powerful strategy to enhance all students' literacy learning. And at the end here, we just have a list of references for you on the next slide. And then I just want to, again, thank you for being here today. We've included contact information on the next slide in case you have additional questions regarding formative assessment practices in literacy. And thank you for all that you do to embrace and uplift literacy for our students in Oregon. We are so appreciative of how hard everyone is working in the classroom here in Oregon. One more quick thing, if you could please take a quick survey for us and provide some feedback on this webinar, we'd greatly appreciate it. And if you haven't yet explored our new website of literacy professional learning resources aligned to the framework, we'll also put that into the chat. Very excited to have that launch last week, or last month, actually. Now we're in September. And it is full of resources for you to use in your districts to lift literacy professional learning with your teachers. So thank you, everybody, for joining us.